Our keynote speaker for today is Deputy Director of Policy Link, Mary Lee. Mary Lee helps guide the Policy Link Center for Health Equity in Place and provides technical assistance and training to public and private agencies collaborating to build healthy communities. Mary is a practicing attorney with more than 25 years of experience using civil rights, land use, and economic development strategies to revitalize neighborhoods and enhance public participation in the policy arena. Mary serves on the Los Angeles Food Policy Council and can also be found on YouTube discussing race, food, and health. If you do a little search of Mary Lee, that's what you'll find. So please welcome Mary Lee.
Good morning, everybody. YouTube is dangerous. Stay off there. I am so happy to be here and just have to confess that I've been to Minnesota a couple of times, but I'm a weather lightweight. I don't do the cold very well. So I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, as my bio indicates, and for me, I wear an overcoat when it hits about 69 degrees. So I'm going to try to find if my hands will unthaw. They're still frozen, but we're working on it. But anyways, I'm really happy to be here and so excited to look at what is such an amazing conference. I mean, you are all amazing. It's wonderful to see this many people up and ready to go so early in the morning, eager to talk about this topic. But it's also an incredible agenda, just such a comprehensive offering. I made a list. I went through the program and I thought, my goodness, there's every conceivable topic on here. And I started to get a little intimidated. Well, what am I going to talk about? Seems like everything's going to be covered in the workshop sessions. So I won't be able to go into depth in many of the things that your workshop speakers will be covering, and I'm sure they'll do a wonderful job. I'm familiar with some of the work of these organizations. And the charter is an incredible document that I know you're going to hear about more throughout our time or your time here at the conference. So this is the kind of blueprint for action that I think is what's going to be necessary to take Minnesota and the work that all of you are doing in your individual organizations and affinities past the finish line in making a real difference in the lives of so many people. And beyond that, beyond the work that you might be doing here in Minnesota, it's just an exciting time to be working on food issues, on trying to create a new paradigm within our food systems. You don't need me to tell you this. Food is hot right now. I mean, food's got TV shows. There's Chopped and Iron Chef and Cupcake Wars, although it starts sounding like food is kind of violent, although food is a conflict. But I guess there's some friendlier food shows out there, too. And food is really innovative right now. It's certainly more so than what I remember reading cookbooks and going to the grocery store with my parents. Now you're seeing pop-up restaurants and all kinds of creative ways to incorporate food into all aspects of our lives. We're seeing food trucks and mobile markets, and people are combining food with culture. And my goodness, if you were at the reception last night and you saw Setu's work and to see how people are combining food with art and using food to express the artistic nature of our own lives, of our own communities. There's also a whole new vocabulary when it comes to talking about food. Again, certainly not the kinds of words that I heard a lot of when I was growing up. Artisanal, I don't know what that means really when it comes to food, but I know a lot of people talk about it. And heirloom, which is a word it's a beautiful word. I just never really thought about it as it relates to food. And sustainable. These are all really important concepts, and people are advocating for them and thinking and talking about food in very, very different ways. But as exciting as all of that is, there's a lot missing, and the vocabulary is a way to see how there are real gaps, not just in our understanding and our discourse about food, but also in the way that we're experiencing food in our communities and the way it's affecting and impacting us individually and as neighborhoods. Some of the words that I'd love to see much more associated with and affiliated with food are words like fair and just, affordable, accessible, quality, healthy. Making those connections is absolutely imperative in order for us to achieve food equity. So let's just take the word fair. Not just about food, because you have to put food in the larger context of those folks when there's a significant number of them who experience food and all the things that go into buying it, producing it, growing it. Maybe I'm doing that backwards. We should start with the growing and go to the buying and consuming it. So it's not fair to have to travel 2 hours each way on public transportation just to have a healthy choice of what you eat. It's not fair to have to pay more for inferior quality food or for a limited variety of food, despite what you might need. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having a medical practitioner tell you to eat not just fresher food, but perhaps to eat gluten-free or low-sodium food and then go to the grocery store in your community and not be able to find those items or to find the cost of them so high. And perhaps not even be aware that if you went to another market in perhaps a more affluent neighborhood, that same product would be cheaper. That's not fair. It's not fair to miss out on the hot food trends, not being able to open a food business, not because you lack the creativity or the ideas or the talent, but because you lack available credit or access to financing and capital. So it's also significant when we start having a conversation about food and that this summit is coinciding with a number of significant anniversaries and civil rights milestones. Just within the last year or so, there have been about, there's been a number of anniversaries that are hitting the 50th year mark. And you might have seen some coverage of this or been involved in some of these activities yourselves in your own communities and your own connections. Just a little while ago, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. The 50th anniversary of the passage of the Civil Rights Act just occurred, and that was the piece of landmark legislation that included voting rights and that advanced fair housing rights. It also incorporated continuing to push towards school desegregation, something that's still a challenge throughout our nation. It's the 50th anniversary of the Immigration and Nationalization Act, which ended exclusions on African and Asian immigrants in this country. And it's also the era that commemorates about a 50-year anniversary of several tragedies of the civil rights movement. The assassination of President Kennedy, of Medgar Evers, of 4 little girls sitting in a Birmingham church who became the victim of a terrorist bomb. So all of those things put us in a mind of understanding how meaningful these aspects of our lives are. And you're probably asking yourselves right now, well, what does any of that have to do with food? And I suggest to you that it has everything to do with food, because you can't have an equitable food system without addressing the larger inequities that exist in our society. Certainly the people who are subjected to an unfair food system, who can't access food, who can't afford food, who are suffering from the food-related health consequences, such as obesity and diabetes and heart disease that come along with unhealthy eating. Those same people are contending with troubled schools, stagnant wages, dilapidated housing, limited transit, exposures to toxic chemicals in their environments, and on and on and on. In fact, food has historically been connected to civil rights struggles. Probably heard the phrase, 40 acres and a mule, which is all about the ability of freed slaves to be able to use the land to grow food to support themselves. Oh, I didn't touch this, did it? Oh, that's scary. Sorry. The relationship between the civil rights movement and food as an issue has been clear for a really long time, and not only for For African Americans, obviously for Native Americans and sovereignty, food has been a clear issue about particular cultural practices related to food. And when folks were separated from their land and separated from their traditions, the impact on their diet and the impact on their health has been immediate and long-standing. You may not know that a hallmark piece of organizing and activism that ran the course of the opposition to Jim Crow laws and ultimately led to some of the civil rights struggles centered around campaigns that African Americans and Latinos waged in their communities not to shop where they weren't allowed to work, making those connections between what you ate, what you purchased, and where you could make a living. And there are more and more examples of that. So look at the food system as just one of many structures in our society that shape the quality of our lives. Obviously, people are already making those connections when it comes to health, but we need to continue to make those connections to planning and land use, to recreation, and that happens more frequently than not, but also to education and also to jobs in the economy. We can't put blinders on. We don't have the luxury of just focusing on food, as exciting as that might be, because we have a bigger objective before us, and that is achieving equity. Can't do that unless you look at what's going on all around you. So it can be difficult to have conversations like this because these are conversations that touch on what continues to be one of the most difficult topics in our society to have a conversation about, and that is the conversation of race. It is the conversation of who has a privilege and who has an ability to decide what their lives will be like. But despite how difficult it is, despite our discomfort, these conversations are happening. They're happening across the country, they're happening here in Minnesota, and they're happening because our country is undergoing such a profound shift demographically. I come from an organization called PolicyLink, and now I'm going to use a couple of my slides because PolicyLink does focus on Okay, there we go. PolicyLink is a National Research and Action Institute. You can read it, I don't have to. But the heart of what PolicyLink does is works to achieve equity. Equity, racial and economic equity is really the core approach that we take. And food and transportation, infrastructure, workforce development, transportation, air quality, public health generally, land use and urban planning, and rural planning and land use decision making as well. These are all things that we have the expertise in, but in service to ultimately creating an equitable society. We define equity at PolicyLink as just and fair inclusion in a society where everyone has a chance to participate and prosper. And I want to underscore that that's a little bit different than what most folks might think of when they hear the word equity. For many people, equity and equality are sort of synonymous with each other. But I want you to understand that they're very, very different. Wonderful thing to have equality. But equality is giving everybody exactly the same thing, and not everybody needs exactly the same thing. Equity is giving people what they need. So I get to be known a lot of the time for the fact that I have a shoe thing. I love shoes. And an easy way to understand equity and equality and the difference between them is sort of a strange analogy is to use shoes. Equality would be giving everybody a pair of shoes, but equity would be giving people a pair of shoes that fit them. And understanding that for some people, shoes aren't going to help at all because they have different needs, they have different ways of mobility. And there's nothing about that that should be frightening to us and difficult for us to discuss, and yet it becomes so. We work on that at PolicyLink, and we try with a variety of methods and strategies to be able to have these conversations in ways that are productive, have these conversations in ways that are developing collaborations. And so one of those is by dividing our work. And the staff in our organization, which I think I indicated is national, our headquarters is in Oakland. We have a small office in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. We have a pretty robust office in New York City. And we have a tiny office in Los Angeles, which is entirely made up of me. So the office is closed today. The point of PolicyLink is that we have an opportunity to work with people across the country on those issues that I did a laundry list of a moment ago. But we divide our work in a couple of different ways, and I work under the auspices of our Center for Health, Equity, and Place. And I want to call your attention to the fact that we very, very deliberately link those concepts. Health equity, not health and equity separated, but health equity and place. Because where you live affects your health, and what your community is like is going to have a tremendous influence on your health. And yes, we are all responsible for our individual choices, but our environments have just about as much to do with our health status. Your zip code is a determinant of your health, stronger than your blood pressure, stronger than your BMI. Your zip code is determining your health because we've created communities throughout our nation that frankly have been designed to be disadvantaged. And for some folks, those are communities where access to healthy food is a struggle every day, not just the affordability, but actually finding it. And finding it without running a gauntlet of all the unhealthy products that you might have to pass along the way, and that's if you live in an urban area. But the irony is if you live in a rural area, sometimes an agriculture area where you're growing the healthy food, they make it leave your community and come back again before you can purchase it. And so again, those are the types of disparities that clearly impact our food environments. But where you live affects your health in a myriad number of ways, and we can't and have not in this nation been able to separate race from place. Because if you know your zip code, you can probably predict someone's health, how long they'll live, also the quality of their life, how much education they'll have, how much money they'll make. But you can probably also predict their race because we separate ourselves by neighborhoods, and we do it across the country in a variety of ways. And if you were to map it, you'd see that most of the neighborhoods that are dominated by people of color are also dominated by these kinds of challenges, these structural challenges, these community development and economic challenges, these health challenges. So that's one of the ways that PolicyLink tries to consider and conceptualize our work. But we also do a number of things to try to help our external partners, our constituents, the people that we really want to engage and interact with, and make these discussions and these concepts clear and tangible in a way that makes them be involved and want to be involved, and it's convenient for them to be involved in making policy changes, impacting policy changes that will really redress these systems, adapt them, improve them, and ultimately create new systems that will prevent the sort of disparities that we've all been contending with for so long. I should say that it's really PolicyLink's I think it's our mission to make our name real. We want to link people to policy, and we want to particularly focus on those who are experiencing the problem because we think it's their wisdom and their voice that needs to be heard. They are usually the ones that have the best ideas of how to solve the problems they've been contending with, but they also often don't have the access to those tables where those decisions get made. So that is one of our missions as well. So just recently, to try and continue on and follow with our goal of making this type of analysis easy and approachable, we launched our National Equity Atlas. In fact, it was just last week that the Atlas was launched. You can go on our website and find it. And I bring it up because it is a way for people to pull together the kinds of data pieces on things like healthy eating, on health indicators, on all the other factors that I was just talking about, so that you can get a clear picture of what's happening now in our country and also what's happening in the communities that you live in. We've got both national data and state and regional data, and we're hoping to get even more granular as we get down to it in the upcoming months and years. And what you'll find on the Equity Atlas is a variety of data points that help you tell the story of what's going on in your community and ultimately help you understand how those issues conspire to create the circumstances we have and can be adapted to improve it. I bring this up because one of the other things that's available on the Atlas site are profiles of a few selected communities who are already in the process of making these sorts of changes. And one of them is Minnesota. Stakeholders and community activists and leaders from Minnesota have been collaborating with PolicyLink for some time, I think since about 2011, to build toward this time. And about a year ago, we released a report called Minnesota Tomorrow, which is also available on the website. And that report is something that I think gives us a sense of what's happening here in Minnesota. So I pulled some data from the report, and it's also available free form on the site as well. And I'm hoping that we can look at a little bit of it right now because it paints a picture of some of the challenges that Minnesota is facing on equity levels, and I hope we can then apply it a little bit to the food context. So in Minnesota, like everywhere else in the country, is really undergoing a profound demographic shift. In 1980, 4% of Minnesotans, is that how you say that? Okay, you guys fill in the blank. People that live in Minnesota. In 1980, 4% were people of color. But today that figure is 17%. And by the year 2040, it's projected to be 29%. So put another way, 30 years ago, 96% of people living in this state were white. And now 1 in 5 are people of color. As much as Minnesota has been lauded, deservedly so, over the years of being a state that works, it's having challenges now delivering on the promise of shared prosperity. The most vulnerable, particularly youth, people of color, the less educated, have been hit very hard by the recession. They're struggling to recover, lost assets, lost income. Inequality and poverty continue, and wages have declined or stagnated in most instances. There are dramatic racial gaps in income here, as well as in education, in health, in wealth, and opportunity. And those gaps remain wide and persistent. Those are undercurrents of inequity that are a serious threat to Minnesota's economic vitality and well-being, and that's so, frankly, in every community across the country. That's one of the reasons why we urge you so much to lead with a focus on equity. I think I have a map. Yeah, so this is just a way of demonstrating that that data I reeled off a moment ago, but to graphically display what the racial and ethnic composition of the state has been and how it's shifted in the past 20, 30 years. It also tells you where in the state these demographic shifts are occurring most rapidly. This is a phrase, ethnic churning, where the communities are changing. And you know your state better than I, but as the colors change from the green to medium and the blue to high, you can see the movement in the population. One of the things that is remarkable about Minnesota is the amount of demographic shift that has to do with immigration. And so, for example, for some immigrant communities, you see extremely high concentrations, almost as high in Minnesota as anywhere else in the country. For the Hmong population, there are over 60,000 here. It's the second largest population in the United States. And the Somali population of more than 30,000 is the largest in the United States. In a place like St. Paul, 3/4 of the students are people of color, and they speak over 100 languages. As remarkable as that is, what we often don't recognize is the value that the diversity and the demographic shifts make in our neighborhoods and in our communities. In Minnesota, people of color are driving growth in the state. 82% of the growth in the last decade has been because of people of color. Latino population has grown by 75%, the African American population by 59%, the Asian population by 50%, the Native American population by 7%. What we sometimes, I think, overlook is that as challenges occur, wonderful opportunities occur too. And so the influx of newcomers from all over the country, from all over the world, are actually helping some of the cities in Minnesota, some of the smaller towns, continue to thrive, to prosper. They're maintaining population. What we also must emphasize is that our youth are even more diverse, the most diverse part of the population. This is where I come from in California, a real fact of life that the predominant number, something like 80 or 90% of the children born in California right now are of color. And this significant shift is happening in Minnesota as well. Okay, what did I do? Oh, that's this way. There we go. So this is a way of showing you the shifts in Minnesota's demographics by age. And this is sometimes referred to as the racial generation gap. Right now, 27% of Minnesota's youth are people of color, but only 5% of Minnesotans over the age of 65 are people of color. So what you see is a significant number of seniors who are white and a significant number of youth who are of color. That's a 22% difference, and that is what in Minnesota would be your racial generation gap. And it's 5 times larger than it was in 1980. People live longer, which is a good thing. But what we expect and project is that by the year 2020, for the first time in Minnesota's history, seniors will outnumber school-aged children. Why does that matter? Because older white Minnesotans, frankly older white Americans, are more often in position of leadership, and they make crucial decisions on whether or not to invest and how to invest in the next generation. So this is another reason why it's an imperative, an equity imperative, if you will, if we consider and make sure to prioritize the needs, the characteristics, the opportunities available to the younger generation, and make sure that we understand each other despite our racial backgrounds, regardless of our culture, our nationality, our language. We've got to use demographics to help us to raise any concerns and to be able to apply our learning to this diverse population of youth. We need to make the investments in education, in communities' infrastructure, so that all children have what they need to succeed. There's an economic case to be made, too, for understanding our changing demographics and diversity. Minnesota's GWP, its gross domestic product, would have been $16 billion higher in 2011 if there weren't racial disparities in income. And the projection is that that gap, that lost productivity, would be $18.3 billion in 2015. People of color represent an expanding customer base of more than $12 billion in purchasing power in this state. Minority-owned businesses grew more than 3.5 times the rate of all businesses in this state between 2002 and 2007. Immigrant entrepreneurs are revitalizing and transforming commercial corridors throughout the state, in Twin Peaks, St. Paul, and smaller cities of Austin, Wilmar, Worthington, just as examples. They've sparked new business growth, created jobs, generated tax dollars, and sustained the vitality of these communities. So what can we do about all of this? We know what we know from these data points. There's more, I'm sure, that you all know about your state, much more than I could ever share with you. But I can share with you some recommendations to bridge these divides that we've created and that we've, in fact, inherited due to our country's historical legacy. We can take some action to make sure that we grow the best residents of this state that it is all possible to grow. That means good jobs. It means creating double bottom line and even triple bottom line strategies. I'm not sure if folks know what that means, but usually folks will refer to the double bottom line concept is when you do well and you do good. You make a lot of money and you do something nice for somebody else in the process. Well, I like to put a little spin on that and think about it being a triple bottom line, that you can be prosperous and good at whatever it is you're doing, but you can also do it in a way that is useful and helpful and contributing to the society around you. And the third bottom line would be that you're advancing equity, that you're making sure that folks that are usually excluded, overlooked, disconnected, are also participating in your endeavor, benefiting from it, buying the product, but also engaged in the production, in the job itself, in the work and positions that are created, are the small business entrepreneurs that might be necessary for that endeavor, are making the decisions that are engaged around that endeavor. And there's lots of ways to accomplish those sorts of triple bottom line strategies. We just have to be intentional about it when we're developing policies, when we're creating pathways to make sure that we're looking at how to do these things, but how to do them differently and effectively. One of them is to prioritize projects so that the projects themselves can be located in communities that have been distressed. Nothing revitalizes a community more than seeing productive activity take place in that community. But often, developers, retailers, people undergoing a new project steer clear of those communities. I'm suggesting that we intentionally go to those communities as the places where we will build and operate these sorts of activities. But also that you want to hire locally and hire from those communities and hire those people who've had barriers put in their path, whether it's limited education or the need for childcare or the need for transportation, whether it's folks that have a criminal background. There are all kinds of ways to address these things. They may be different from what we're used to, but they're going to be necessary in order to incorporate everybody in our society, and particularly those who've been left out and left on the side. We want to ensure as much as possible that local and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses have access to contracting opportunities, and this is particularly true in the public sector. So when you create a new program, make sure that you look for opportunities in government to make those connections. And I'm going to talk about that as it relates to food in just a second. And I'm going to get to food, so don't worry about it. We want to do things, for example, with government contracts that can require people who are doing bids, winning bids, would require them to pay good wages. Build that in to the qualifications list. We want to connect job seekers with the career paths that will build on to paying living wages, to providing benefits, to providing an opportunity for leadership and decision making. And that is something that doesn't happen remarkably as much as it should. But there are wonderful examples that you can learn from if you're not already doing some of those things in the work that you're doing. We want to increase access to credit and loans and financing, particularly for people of color or for those who've been shut out of our financial system, who are relying on a financial system that often puts barriers in their way that are almost insurmountable. And there's so much to learn from different ways that are being utilized around the world in making credit and financing available, from micro-lending to co-ops to another, to many other, crowdsourced funding, all kinds of things and innovations in funding that we need to broaden and make more available and more accessible. We need to leverage anchor institutions, and this is a really interesting concept, and it's particularly interesting when it comes to food, and I swear I'll get to it in a second. Anchor institutions are not going anywhere. There are big government buildings and museums, hospitals, schools, universities. They are government agencies, and when you can link job programs and other sorts of endeavors to those anchor institutions, you don't have to worry about training someone for a program that might leave and go overseas to create jobs there for others. There's some great examples even here of efforts that people have underway to do this sort of intentional focus on populations that have been left out. And one is the Big River Farms training program that the Minnesota Food Association hosts. That's an incubator program, and it supports immigrant farmers to become independent, to become certified organic growers. That's the kind of good idea. It's always a good idea to support farmers, but to target the farmers that are perhaps not able to participate in a typical program, may not be aware of it, may have barriers such as language. But this way, you are able to focus it on not just a great idea, but a great idea for the population that will benefit, that will advance equity. The St. Paul Neighborhood Development Center is another example, an organization that provides small business support. It's trained more than 4,000 low-income people of color to write business plans. It's helped finance nearly 500 businesses, launched over 1,000 businesses. Graduates then turn around and also do the same thing, locate their businesses in disadvantaged communities, hire from the community of low-income people of color who are typically not able to get those kinds of jobs. So graduates of the program report that 80% of their employee workforce are people of color. 60% of their businesses are in buildings that were formerly vacant, which means they're revitalizing the communities that they're from. And they've, in the process, returned over $64 million in taxes and rent and payroll to the communities that they occupy. And we can prepare vulnerable youth for tomorrow. And this is a really critical recommendation, particularly as we see this data about what our society is going to look like. We want to make sure that young people have quality educations, and I think the commissioner was making reference to that as well. We want to create a pipeline for those young people to fill jobs in high-demand occupations that also provide career paths, and also to acknowledge that we need a workforce that will fill the vacancies that are going to be caused by retirees. And finally, we need to dismantle the racial barriers. And we know that those continue to exist all over our society. This is hard work to redress those historic patterns of race and economic exclusion. But we can build on this rich mix of cultures, of nationalities, of races, of faiths that are all calling Minnesota home. Shifting this focus will really change the odds for Minnesota's communities of color, and in the process it'll make the entire state of Minnesota face a future that's much, much brighter. And that leads me back to food. Got to get there somehow. Because I wanted to make sure that you understand that food isn't just out there by itself, and our food system isn't just out there by itself. It has to connect to all of these other sectors in our society. And so somebody like me who comes to this work with a background in housing and land use and community and economic development, I used to ask myself, what does food have to do with it? And now I'm urging you who have deep and rich backgrounds on food action to think about these other elements of our society, because we get it. We get that food is health, that food is economic vitality, that food is the quality of life in neighborhoods. So let me talk a little bit about how some of the systems that I work with and that I'm familiar with through my work at PolicyLink have given us a chance to apply an equity lens to the food work. Because, like I said a minute ago, it's not enough to just have a good idea. It needs to be a good idea, a creative strategy when it comes to food that is shifting our former approach to an equity approach. Sometimes when I hear someone describe a project, maybe it's opening up a farmer's market, I ask myself, will this project, as wonderful as it sounds, as neat as it might be, oh, I just said neat, how old am I? However hip it might be, there we go, is it gonna change the quality of life for a little girl, for a little boy, living in an inner city community? Will the benefit trickle down to them of this cool, hip farmers market? And is there a way to shift it so that the cool, hip farmers market puts them first, that they're the first target of this particular endeavor, that they're the intended beneficiaries, not just an accidental beneficiary? There's that truism that a rising tide lifts all boats, so have the farmers market because ultimately it'll benefit people at the bottom. Well, I don't know about that. I've seen a lot of those pictures of great big waves after a tsunami, for example, tidal waves, and the little boats always get crushed. The little boats always get thrown aside. The boats that are a little rickety, they're the ones that don't quite make it. So I'd like to see us start with putting our strategies into the communities and targeting the people that need them the most. So I'm going to go through a laundry list of some cool, hip strategies, which I also think are, from our work, focusing on equitable outcomes. And the first, and again, almost every one of these is going to be connected in one of the workshops that is available through your conference program, so glance through it if you're interested in what I raised, because I bet they will go deeper into each one of these in those sessions. But the first is food financing initiatives, and there are now a variety of them, and that's an exciting thing, because what's the first thing that you almost always need when you want to change a system? Money. And food financing initiatives do just that. The national program is called the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, which President Obama has included in his budget in the last few sessions, and this last go-round was placed under the auspices of the Department of Agriculture. And this initiative since 2011 has put over $110 million in 26 states, over 100 projects, mostly distributed through community development financial institutions, sort of intermediaries that get that money out to communities across the country. Food financing initiatives are based largely on a really, really innovative model that sprung to life in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is one of those states that really was struggling with the concept of food deserts. There's another one of those vocabulary words that we should associate with food. And I'm sure everybody by now knows what a food desert is, places where it's really difficult to find food in a close proximity, or healthy food, certainly in close proximity, particularly to low-income communities and communities of color. And this has become an epidemic in certain parts of the country where grocery stores have closed down. I come from Los Angeles, and we certainly have experienced this problem in LA and throughout California, but it's a problem in the Northeast, it's a problem in parts of the South. New Orleans is a classic example, certainly after Katrina, when a number of business and food-related businesses were washed away in the aftermath of the levees breaking following the hurricane. So we know that to get a new grocery store into a community, it takes a lot of work, and it takes money, and it takes the assembly of land. But what folks began to realize in Pennsylvania, particularly in the Philadelphia area, is that it took more than just the money. It took encouragement, incentives, a bit of hand-holding to overcome the negative perceptions that the retailers had of low-income communities and communities of color. And that's one of those vestiges of our racial attitudes in this country that manifest themselves a lot, unfortunately, in business practices. So how did they get there? Well, they began to talk to retailers, get some of them to take a chance. Certainly the money sweetened the deal. And as a result, in Pennsylvania, based on their fresh food financing initiative, more than 83 new or renovated grocery stores were opened, creating about 5,000 jobs, and 400,000 residents had increased food access due to the new stores that opened as a result of investment from the fresh food financing initiative. But since then, the HFFI, the federal program that has been the model, that was modeled on the Pennsylvania program, has broadened its spectrum. And so HFFI doesn't just give out funds to traditional supermarkets or grocery stores. As I said before, it always opened itself up to loans for, or grants for renovation. But now it looks at a whole array of food retail, everything from from food carts and mobile food to food hubs and distributors. So just a couple of examples of those. Green City Grocers in Cleveland, that is a really innovative program that is affiliated with the Evergreen Cooperative, that also operates in Cleveland. A co-op which means that the employees are not employees, they're actually worker owners, and it focuses on people who live in that inner ring in Cleveland, which is very low income, a lot of folks disconnected from the workforce for a very long time, not able to overcome a lot of barriers that were put in their way for job applications. And so going through this co-op worker program, they become the owners of this endeavor. Evergreen started when civic leaders listened to the founders of the Evergreen group and decided that they would be able to put folks to work in this owner co-op method, and they collaborated with anchor institutions. What I said before, the Cleveland Clinic and the hospitals in that region agreed to be the customers for the work that the cooperative did. And the first work was a laundry, because they knew that people in a hospital did a lot of laundry. So that was their first endeavor. They did about 6,000 worker members. They moved on to food, and so Green City Grocers is their collaborative that grows hydroponically food for those same customers, hospitals and universities in the Cleveland area. And the same kinds of folks are members of the co-op. The TOCA organization in South Arizona, which is the Tahoma Odom Community Action Group that serves the reservation in South Arizona, it meets the needs of the tribe and particularly provides healthy, traditional, and locally grown food for schools and institutional partners, also anchor institutions. I'm going to go a little bit faster because I got a sign that I don't have a lot of time left. The Salud Corporation in Texas, another HFFI recipient, which is a Latina-led startup that manufactures and distributes, distributes high-quality extra virgin olive oil to get folks to substitute the olive oil for lard in cooking. So the key to all these efforts is that they're not just creative, they're not just hip and cool, but they also advance equity. And I've got a bunch of others that I'll just run through really quickly in other arenas, not just the financing, but in the endeavors themselves. So using the power of local regulatory systems. A lot of food work is local, and it's local deliberately and intentionally so. Healthy food carts in New York and the Baltimore's Healthy Carryout program. These provide incentives for healthier offerings in underserved neighborhoods. Healthy corner store work in Baldwin Park in California and in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz has a Jóvenes Sanos program where youth lead the work to get the corner stores to convert. And these are Latino youth who are really taking this on as a part of their understanding of what their communities are like. There are examples from urban agriculture, cities, for example, inventorying land and making sure that people in communities know where they can undertake growing for community-supported agriculture, also for just urban ag in general. Grants for startups, this is happening in Madison and in Boston, startup farmers, and the inventory is happening in Cleveland and Seattle and in Oakland. Providing city services, thank you so much, at reduced or no cost in order to encourage growing. And I think that's something that happens even here in Minnesota. And then removing the land use barriers that often restrict urban agriculture. And then there's just a whole array of things that are happening throughout the food landscape where small businesses and more job creation connected to food are taking place. So particular workforce training and jobs in the food system, that's a great project in Massachusetts, which is actually called the Food Project. They were able to support youth programs in Boston related to workforce development, and Growing Home as a program in Chicago that does workforce development with homeless and formerly incarcerated residents to get jobs in urban agriculture. And I can go on, but I'm going to stop with that because there were a couple of other pieces that I wanted to be able to focus on. And these last examples that I'm going to give come from where I'm from, which is Los Angeles. We in Los Angeles have a huge challenge. The biggest challenge, I think, is how big the region is. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit because it's important for me to perhaps model for you the most passionate you get is often when you're talking about where you're from. And for food, this is really key, that it resonates with the people that you want to serve, the people that you want to engage, because food resonates with them. Food represents their culture, food represents good times and bad times, represents coming together. As we heard from Setu last night, it represents passion and love and community. And it also, I think, sometimes illustrates to people just how graphically where there might be real differences, vivid differences in how they live and how others live. So we can have all these conversations around food. We can mobilize people to action and organizing around food. But it's important for you to do that within the context of the people that you're working with. And so I can talk about what's happening in Los Angeles because it's what I've spent a lot of time knowing. And I'm encouraging you to do the same thing as you do your food work. Don't parachute in and tell people what they need. And I'm sure none of you do that. Definitely spend the time and lift their strategies and lift their ideas, partner with them and facilitate what they're working on. Because I can tell you they're all working on something, and this is what will give you that sense. Because in LA, I'm on this food policy council that we formed, and it took us a long time. It actually took us 20 years to get the food policy council in Los Angeles, almost embarrassing. Started and stopped, lots of infighting, lots of different ideas of what was needed or whether or not it was needed. But about 6 years ago, a mayor's task force was formed, and that ran for a couple of years, and ultimately we formed a food policy council. And it's reminiscent when I hear today about your planning committee for this summit. We came together in a similar way with lots of stakeholders from different aspects of the spectrum of what's happening in community, and many of those folks had not necessarily worked on food, land use planners, for example. But we also engaged food folks that didn't necessarily talk to each other, retailers and food retail representatives, folks from the grocery industry, but also from the public health sector and from academia and from education, schools, and many, many folks that worked on food security issues, and food justice advocates. And we shaped our work through a set of guiding principles. We wanted to be catalysts, we wanted to connect people, we wanted to collaborate, but we also wanted to have an equity focus. We wanted to make sure that the food issues we took on linked the workforce and labor issues to food retail, to food production, to sustainability and the environment. We wanted it to be regional. We wanted it to be public and private. We wanted to focus on systems change. So that's one example that I'll submit to you. And I know there's a workshop on food policy councils or food networks during this conference. But that in and of itself, we've been able to morph into not just a group of people who've been quote unquote appointed, but we've opened up our food policy network so that every other month we convene an open to anyone food working group space. And we've had such an array of leaders who've come forward from all aspects of the community to talk about their food issues, whether it's urban ag, healthy food retail, food equity issues, just an array of different things. Street vendors just created its own group, genetically modified food, fish farming, anything you can think of, we've had working groups on it. Even the notion of connecting food to restorative justice, which is just a topic that we hosted just recently. You'd be amazed. At each of these working group sessions, we have over 200 people come, and they're not always the same people, coming forward to talk to us about food. And how it impacts their lives and how it can change their lives and change their systems. This is an invigorating place and space to be, and in one of those conversations emerged the issue of corner stores. And this is something, again, I think you guys will be talking about in some of the other sessions. Corner stores in Los Angeles really are a facet of our system's inequality, because in some neighborhoods it's the only game in town. I'm born and raised in South Los Angeles, so it's a community that is roughly 60 miles in radius and home to about 1 million people. And much of it is extremely disadvantaged, but there are fewer than 5 supermarkets that serve this entire area. Most people are living close to a corner store, and corner store is a polite term for what they're living next to. Most of it really is liquor stores and convenience stores. And so there's been a tremendous amount of hostility sometimes and racialized tensions related to those corner stores as well. In my legal career as a legal aid attorney for many years, I worked with folks who were so frustrated by the climate of violence and drug addiction and drug dealing that clustered around liquor stores in their neighborhood. There were more than 900 liquor stores in South LA in the 1980s and 90s. My time is up, but I have to tell this story, so I'm gonna. In any event, the community came together and was so frustrated about the conditions of these stores and the breeding ground for violence. And unfortunately, their fears have been borne out in so many instances. One of them, the most dramatic of all, was following the verdicts being released in the Rodney King case in 1992, the city erupted into all sorts of civil unrest, but the worst incident was right in front of one of the liquor stores the community residents have been trying to close down for many years, and that's where Reginald Denny was beaten in the intersection by folks who'd been hanging out and drinking all day in front of a liquor store. These liquor stores were symbols to the community of how its needs were not being met and its concerns were not being listened to. Now fast forward almost 20 years, and maybe even more than 20 years, and what we're seeing are community residents going to those same stores and having conversations with merchants that they used to have nothing but conflict with, and talking to them about how to improve those stores. And it led our Food Policy Council to shape and to form a neighborhood healthy neighborhood market training program, not for community members, but for the merchants themselves. And it's turned those merchants into a community, because many of them are immigrants, many of them are low income, many of them are sort of isolated in our society, isolated economically, isolated from their neighbors. And it's led to them understanding a lot more about the context that they're operating in. And many of them have begun to convert those stores, convert them visually, operate them in an aesthetic way that's much neater, that's much cleaner, but also to offer a much healthier array of products and to shift and adjust the displays in their stores. And we've partnered them with experts in the retail industry, some of them from very, very high-end stores like Whole Foods, who've come to them and said, we'll show you how to buy, we'll show you how to display, we'll show you how to preserve the foods that you have and to keep them so that you don't have a lot of waste. And we're moving on to other kinds of discussions about distribution and co-op buying and food hubs that might help this network of small corner stores be a much better delivery system, advancing equity in a triple bottom line kind of a strategy. So I had a couple other things that I was going to go over, but I'll just mention them in passing and encourage you to do this, and maybe I can get this last slide up here to show you, nope, forget all of that, to show you, I can't go fast enough. Okay, well, I wanted to get to the fact that our Food Policy Council does something that your charter will do too, and that is to pull out some of the best data points. But this is what I wanted to show you, that a lot of what I'm talking about and more is available nationally to anybody from our PolicyLink Healthy Food Access Portal. And I shouldn't say PolicyLink because we do it in partnership with two other organizations, the Food Trust and the Reinvestment Fund, who are those Pennsylvania organizations that help get their fresh food financing initiative off the ground. And we have on the portal lots of the same stories that I told you and some others. We have a whole series of webinars that are archived, and we always have new ones coming up on a variety of issues that relate to food and equity. But more than anything, we hope to create a community on our food portal where people like you are telling their stories, learning from each other, making our food paradigm a very different one, shifting our food system to something very different than it is today, something that's just, that's fair, that meets the needs of those children that are our future for tomorrow here in Minnesota and throughout the country. Thank you so much for having me today. I really am encouraged by your work and your passion and your commitment. I know you're going to have a tremendous conference, and I look forward to hearing about all your successes in the future. Thank you so much.
We have a short Q&A session now.
So Mary, you mentioned that one of the mission for Policy Link was to link or empower people to policy. Do you have any examples of that you can share?
I can't move away from this. I'm having a hard time seeing in the lights. Sure. Again, I'll go to what I know best, which is Los Angeles. In addition to having a tremendous saturation, if you will, of corner stores, convenience stores, liquor stores in much of South LA, in fact, in much of Los Angeles, period. The same neighborhoods are often overrun by fast food outlets, and people were extremely concerned. As much as we often sort of blame the victim with saying people keep buying the fast food and that's their choice, in some neighborhoods they're inundated. There really aren't any choices, and in a place like LA, which is also transit challenged, long distances to get somewhere else. So, the community was concerned that much like they'd seen the liquor store issue where they kept coming and new ones kept opening and they wanted to sort of put a lid on it, they asked to do the same with fast food. And we were able to introduce with community, really this emerged totally from community residents, a moratorium on fast food, new fast food construction, outlet construction in South LA for a couple of years. And during that 2-year time, because a moratorium by definition is a temporary measure, during that time, the city planning department, in conjunction with community residents and food activists, created a permanent solution which was incorporated in our general plan. I hate to get real wonky on land use terminology and process, but what it really created was a way for the land use controls to limit new fast food constructions. It's not completely outlawed, but it's based on its proximity to other fast food outlets, to the type of facility that it would be located in. And so it has markedly dropped new fast food openings in the South Los Angeles area. And I say this because, again, that's why you can't just work on one thing. You really do have to at least be aware of the context that you're in. In many places, land assembly is extremely expensive. And so what you've done when you create those sorts of openings is that only very affluent buyers or developers can get in. And the fast food industry can buy land easier than a lot of other operators. They also sometimes are dealing with land that's dirty, that's got environmental toxins in it, and only very well-off developers can afford to clean it up. So we have to figure out ways to address those things, because community residents would say, well, why can't we put a produce stand there? Why can't we put a park there? Why can't we do something other than fast food, a sit-down restaurant or another kind of a store? And these were some of the competing interests that we're being able to address with involving people in policy, making them understand what the restrictions and the constraints have been, and changing them. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering if you've had any conversations about or thought about how, given your background and expertise in land use planning and how that informs these issues, about what are some of the impacts of, for example, the drought that you're seeing in California going to be on equity and access to food?
That is an excellent and really tough question, because again, California is often referred to as the shopping basket or the produce cart of the nation. Fresno and the Central Valley grow an enormous amount of produce, and we're already seeing huge fights over water in California, and the water as a subset of food, if you can even call it that. I think the water wars are going to outstrip our struggles over oil and fuel in the world, and we can't disconnect ourselves from all of those struggles. So yes, we're already seeing it manifest itself in pricing, and we're seeing it manifest itself in the ability of small farmers particularly to be able to compete and stay alive. Those water allotments in the Central Valley, they are old allotments based on land deeds, and so they're not particularly fair because folks who were involved in that industry 100 years ago tend to not be people of color, not to be immigrants, not to be low-income folks. So all of these things are playing out right now, and our policymakers, our governor, our legislators are trying very hard to address them. I don't think the food activists are necessarily in lockstep yet or in unity, because I think what we're seeing first is the impact on farm workers and them losing jobs, frankly, because the seasons are shorter, because the crops aren't productive. A lot of farm workers are starting to lose jobs, and so these are those stresses that we're going to see. And I think, again, climate change is another piece of this discussion that you can't really work in the food arena and not be mindful of the impacts that climate change will have. It's drought in California, but it's manifesting itself in other places, in other parts of the country. Any other questions? So I was saying you guys might love me if I let you get to your break a little early, so I might be in that position unless there are any other questions. I can't see, so if there are any questions, you should let me know. Well, if you have any, you can go on our website, policylink.org. Not only food, but a whole array of other issues. The portal is just one piece, and the equity outlets, they're just two pieces, frankly, of our work available on our website. And my contact information is there as well. So if you feel like sharing any of your stories, we'd be happy to hear them. Maybe they'll end up on the portal anyway. But keep me posted on your work. I know I'll be watching to make sure that all the promise that is demonstrated in your work is acknowledged and recognized and shared. Thank you so much.